Britain is going to make the great escape. We are going to get out of this union. We will be the first European country to get our freedom back. I suspect many others will follow. And then what we will have is our democracy back, our liberty back, and we will have influence in the world as you lot head for disaster.
Well, it's been one hell of a week if you've been reading the papers. If you've read the Huffington Post, if you've taken a look at the Independent or the Telegraph, you would think the sky is falling and that Nazism has taken over Europe. In fact, I'm pretty sure they told me that Adolf Hitler was secretly alive and had raised his army from the Arctic, and they were going to fly their UFOs over England and conquer it once and for all because of how you fascist bastards voted in the European elections. Now, for those of you unaware of what the hell the European Union is, or the parliamentary elections that just took place, don't feel bad. You don't even know that you're in a union on your own. That's right, you're part of the Pan-American Union, if you're in the United States. Now, that got changed later on to the Organization of American States, but it's still a Pan-American Union. So what exactly happened this last week? The elections were open from the 22nd of May to the 25th, I believe. It was a 4-day period to vote. Now, I'm not 100% on how they staggered that, which countries voted when, but I am aware of the results. I'm also very aware of the coverage it's gotten. Some of the most ridiculous shit I've read ever has been printed in this last week. I wasn't kidding. Let me show you some of these news headlines, and you try to figure out what's going on. Here's the one from the Huffington Post. European elections, 9 scariest far-right parties now in the European Parliament. And it has a video linked below it that says, Fascism on the rise in Europe. Far-right parties make shocking gains. Now, you've got to give it to the Huffington Post. They're very unbiased. That's why they have Ed Miliband linked in the upper left-hand corner. Because if we're going to talk shit about UKIP, we better link to Labour, because that's obviously the unbiased thing to do. Bravo, Huffington Post. Way to keep that fucking integrity. But I think my favorite, my absolute favorite so far is the Independent, who actually printed this. This isn't me making this up. Has UKIP's success in the European elections proved that democracy is a flawed way to choose a government? The popular vote has been criticized by people from Plato to Winston Churchill, so has UKIP's victory proved them right? So just what is it that these groups have done that have scared so many people? They must be terrible. I mean, UKIP must have a platform. Their planks must be for eugenics and for concentration camps. They must want to kill dark people and gas the Jews and get rid of anybody with a medical illness, I guess. The National Front in France, I heard they drown kittens. That's what I heard. I heard the lady in charge of that likes to drown kittens. That's what the newspapers told me. These people are twisted and sick in the head. So what exactly is it that they're running on? What was the main crux of their campaigns? Well, they were anti-European Union, which is kind of weird when you think about it, because they're getting elected into the European Union and they're against it. So what was their goal? What are they trying to accomplish? Well, in the case of UKIP, in the case of Nigel Farage, they want a referendum. They want Britain to be able to vote to get the fuck out of Dodge. Now, why would they want to leave? You remember just a few minutes ago I said, if you're in the United States, you're part of a union too, the Pan-American Union. So maybe if we compare and contrast these two giant bodies, these two massive organizations, we can get an idea of what exactly it is they don't like about the European Union in the first place. So let's take a look at the amount of space we're talking about here. This is a comparison between the Pan-American Union, or the Organization of American States, and the European Union. You can see it's everybody, almost everybody, with the exception of, I believe, Cuba and Honduras that were kicked out for a while, and I'm not sure if they're back in or not. It's a little tenuous. But for the most part, at least with the Pan-American Union, it is everybody, from the northern tip of Canada to the southern tip of Argentina. We are all in this Pan-American Union together. And when you look at the European Union, you can see it's a little bit staggered. But for the most part, most of Western Europe and Central Europe are a part of it. So that's the geographical spaces we're talking about. But I think really the biggest difference is easiest to pick up on when you look at the symbols for each of these two organizations. I'm going to show you. This is the difference. I think it's very striking when you actually just see it laid bare in front of you. And this is what I'm talking about. On the left is a symbol for the Pan-American Union, and on the right is a symbol for the European Union. Now, what do you notice? What is the first thing that strikes you as being different between these two things? Well, the European Union has a symbol that's generic. It's one solid color, it has stars, there's no unique characteristics to it. There's no allusions to their flags or to the histories or anything. It is a whitewashed version. We are all equal in diversity. Nobody is different, nobody is better, nobody is worse. It's just a vague symbol. On the left, you have the Pan-American Union. And the first thing that strikes you about that is everybody's flag is there. It's a union, yes. There are member states, yes. But they're each represented. Everybody's flag is prominently displayed. It's not one solid color. Nobody's represented with some geometric shape. Their identity is present because they form part of the collective. And I think that really is one of the major differences when you look at the policies between the Pan-American Union and the European Union. And I think it gives you insight into why exactly it is somebody like Farage and UKIP, or I believe it's the National Front in France, or Golden Dawn in Greece, or the parties that won in Sweden and in Germany, and all these other groups, these far-right groups as they've been described, these anti-EU groups, exactly what it is they dislike. But the differences go far beyond just simple symbology. I mean, this kind of gives you a general idea of the differences I'm talking about when you compare the symbol of the Pan-American Union with the European Union. It's about identity, it's about national sovereignty, about heritage and history, about the right to govern oneself, to have representation that represents the people, to have the people's will be heard. Now, when you look at the Pan-American Union, when you look at the Charter, Article 1 of the Charter sets out in very explicit terms exactly what it's trying to do, but it includes national sovereignty, integrity of the borders, and independence. It's a vital piece of what the Pan-American Union is. The European Union, on the other hand, is quite different. Now, in the Pan-American Union, because America's having, let's say, a financial crisis, that doesn't mean that Brazil needs to have austerity measures. Greece can't say the same. That doesn't mean that Mexico has to have forced immigration from, from Panama. England can't say the same. And that doesn't mean that something like the United States or Canada would have their constitution superseded by an officiating body above them. But again, member states of the European Union cannot say the same. Farage and these different groups that you've seen kind of rise up and gain popular votes have been saying all along, we are against the notion of forced cooperation. Yes, we want to have trade with one another. Yes, we want to have movement of people between borders. We want to have a shared defense. But we don't want to see our identity destroyed. We don't want to see our right to govern ourselves destroyed. And we believe that as a sovereign nation, we have the right to govern ourselves and not be dictated to by some officiating body that isn't even located in our own country. This is one of the major differences between these two things. The Pan-American Union really concerns itself with a shared security and certain economic policies, and that's it. It is not going to dictate to any one of its member nations what it must or must not do. And nations can leave freely if they choose to. With the European Union, it is stagnated. There have been calls for referendums to leave that have been delayed until, I believe, 2017, and constantly moving the goalpost, where parties like UKIP are saying, let's just vote now, put it to the people. Let the people vote if they want to leave. Another major difference is the currency. In the European Union, you have the euros, and this has affected economies all throughout Europe. In America, and in South America, and in Central America, we have our own independent currencies. We trade with one another, sure, but we don't have something like an Ameros that supersedes the dollar, that replaces the peso. We wouldn't do that because it would hurt our economies. Europe is still struggling with this. Over the last decade, you've seen riots. That's part of what the clips were from the beginning of austerity riots in Europe and in Spain. You've seen riots in Sweden and in France and in England. And they've been related to multitudes of issues, from immigration to economy. But at the core of it, and I truly do believe what you hear from a lot of these anti-EU parties, that a good deal of the problems they face right now currently are a result of being forced into this union that is not delivering what they were promised it was going to deliver, and that has overreached the authority that they were told it was going to have. Now, constantly throughout this, the lead up to these elections, specifically, I'm going to be specifically talking about UKIP because that's the one I'm most familiar with. I understand National Front and Golden Dawn and a few of the others, but UKIP is the one I'm more familiar with. The run up to these elections, they've been just harangued in the public press. They've been accused of everything from homophobia to racism to fascism. They've been, called anti-everything. Every nasty thing that you could possibly hurl at them has been thrown at them. Now, I'm going to play you a clip. It's a bit long. It's not too long. It's a segment of a speech that Farage gave at the EU Parliament. You tell me if this sounds like a fearmonger. You tell me if this sounds like a Nazi to you.
Age when the gap between ordinary voters and the European political class grows wider by the day, I have to ask you, having listened to your words this morning, just what planet are you on? This pretence that everything's going incredibly well. The EU is mired in deep structural crisis. Greece and Portugal and Ireland cannot survive inside the euro. The Danes have torn up the Schengen Agreement, and good for them, because the total free movement of peoples is a completely irresponsible thing to have done. And public opinion is saying, whilst they want a European cooperation, yes, of course I agree with that, what they don't want is this Europe run by unelected bureaucrats like Mr Barroso. You say the EU is fantastic in a recent comment. You're supporting the destruction of national democracy. But it's with reference to Greece that I'm most concerned about you, because when faced with their recent enslavement, you said, "We lived for many years as a non-sovereign country under Soviet occupation. For us, European integration is not a threat to sovereignty, because we experienced not long ago a serious threat to our sovereignty." So what are you saying? That this isn't quite as bad as the USSR? Is that really good enough for your people? And today you describe Greece's problems as trivial. I'm sorry, there are hundreds of thousands of people out there on the streets of Greece fighting to get their democracy back. And it beggars belief that you and our President, Mr Buzek, can talk about the solidarity movement, can talk about Poland getting its democracy back 20 years ago, and yet here you are, surrendering the democracy and sovereignty of Poland to a failed European Union. Yes, sir, we all want a shared European cooperation for the future, but this most definitely is not the model.
And yet, even with public speeches like that, Farage in England or Le Pen in France are still vilified as being these closet fascists that want to overthrow democracies, that want to take away people's ability to govern themselves. Yet every speech I've seen him give, and the speeches that I've watched of hers, they don't ever say that. They don't like the idea of their nations being made to bend a knee to an organization that seems to be out of touch with their nation's needs. They don't like the idea of open border immigration when it hurts their economy. How did nationalism, the idea that one's nation should be put first and foremost, become a dirty word in Europe? And why is it that Euroscepticism seems to be, taken in the public press to be code words for Nazism or fascism, when it's not, when these groups have done everything but that? They're talking about the will to govern themselves, and that's being treated like it's a dirty thing. Well, as much as the press may paint it as one way, the votes show it a completely different way. Le Pen won in France. Farage won in England. You look at Golden Dawn, my God, Golden Dawn has had their political party, their leaders have been arrested. They've been tied to things like Adolf Hitler and Nazism. They've been accused of everything you could imagine. And this was all well before the EU election. And yet, even with that, they still won. They won seats. When you look in Germany, a similar situation happened with an anti-EU group. In Sweden, another situation happened with an anti-EU group. Because that message resonates. Because people are tired of feeling like they're not being listened to. There's this bizarre notion of multiculturalism and this unification of Europe, but that it must be done at all, by any means necessary. That to attain this ideal political body, we must erase the identities of every nation that's a part of it. We must strip them bare. We must break them down so they cannot govern themselves, so they are dependent wholly and solely upon the European Union to take care of all their needs, to officiate all their needs, to set their laws and their taxes and their economies and their defenses, to dictate to them how immigration must be handled. It's this forced notion, democracy by gunpoint, which America has been accused of doing in countries, war after war after war. But yet, if you look at the Pan American Union, it's a completely different situation. And it begs the question, why are these two structures so completely different? Why does the Pan American Union have this cooperation between member states and yet allow such individuality and self-governance, whereas the European Union doesn't? That partly is why you've probably never heard of the Organization of American States, because it doesn't screw with your daily life. Because it's not so prevalent in the American psyche or in the Canadian psyche or the Mexican or the Colombian or the Brazilian mindset. So if it's not affecting us here in America, if we're not thinking about it, then it must not be intrusive. Yet in Europe, they're constantly talking about it. So it must be intrusive. It must at least affect them on enough of a daily level where it has become an issue they feel willing to vote on. And so you have the press painting all these people as terrible because they would dare to say that they want to put their country first. Because you have an Englishman who thinks England is good. Because you have a Frenchman that likes France. And that's a terrible thing, to have pride in one's nation, to want to put it first and foremost and protect it.
La politique des Français, pour les Français, avec les Français.
Well, to those people that think nationalism is a dirty word and that these elections are a sign of the apocalypse, you'd better batten down the fucking hatches, because the wind has definitely changed directions. I feel a weather front moving in. With that, let's go to Nigel for the 4-day forecast.
And now the weather for all areas of the British Isles, but definitely not Bongo Bongo land.